The topic of this module is a difficult one, so please notify me if the subject of violence against women is triggering for you in any way, and you would like to opt out of engaging with this material. The fact is that women are viewed as inferior to men cross-culturally. There are, however, some economic, political, and legal reasons that contribute to their mistreatment, abuse, and death that are important for us to discuss. Worldwide, women are generally lower in status and power relative to men, and the factors that contribute to this are multifaceted. We can see a few of them listed here, which is a representation of the figure from your textbook, and we'll take a look at some of these in the lecture here today. Men's control of economic resources increases women's dependence on men and gives men power over women. We see cross-culturally that women's economic power is positively related to having a say in household decisions. Men's economic power provides them with greater control of legal, judicial, and political systems, which further supports gender inequality. Additionally, women's unpaid labor is often not seen as real work because it is considered part of a woman's natural role as wife and mother. Of course, women often do work for pay, approximately 40% worldwide, but women's greater household and childcare responsibilities place them at a disadvantage for full-time employment, and on average, they earn 15% less than men, although there is great regional variation within this, and we've discussed this in previous modules when we talked about the gender wage gap. As we've learned previously, though, only part of the gender wage gap can be explained by differences in educational attainment, job experience, and part-time work. Women's lack of economic power is also related to their strong presence among the ranks of the poor. In addition to occupying a smaller presence of the paid workforce and lower wages, gender biases in property and inheritance laws and education also leave women at greater risk for poverty. The gap between women and men caught in the cycle of poverty has widened recently, a phenomenon which is commonly referred to as the feminization of poverty. As we saw earlier in the semester, most of the world's politicians and lawmakers are men, which means that our representative democracies are not as so representative. This matters because most men lawmakers are less inclined to think about sexual assault, domestic violence, women's reproductive rights and health issues, and women's labor outside the home. There are several avenues for improvement, including increasing women's participation in formal politics and their legal literacy, that is, the knowledge of their legal rights, as well as reforming law enforcement institutions such that they are responsive to crimes against women. In many ways and in many places, boys and men are still more valued than girls and women and enjoy a higher social standing. Job prestige is one example of women's lower status. Jobs held predominantly by women are typically lower in status and pay than jobs traditionally held by men. Women's significant unpaid household labor and care responsibilities are also often overlooked or devalued. STEM fields, for example, are stereotypically male, and women are, on the other hand, dominate positions in low-status work such as clerical, service, and domestic work, including, like cleaning jobs in homes or office buildings. Even sports suffer from unequal coverage and pay across genders. For example, the U.S. women's national soccer team is still in a fight for equal pay, despite the fact that they dominate the game and are far superior to the men's national team here in the U.S. Not only are male activities valued over female ones, but also in many countries, sons are valued over daughters in what is known as son preference. This trend is particularly common in countries across Asia, where significantly more boy babies are born and survive due to gender-based sex selection, which is often classified as a form of violence against girls. This has actually resulted in approximately 120 million missing women, and this is predominantly within China and India, and they're considered missing because these women just never made it. They didn't live beyond the age of 5. Gender-based sex selection takes two forms. They're both prenatal and postnatal sex selection. We tend to see prenatal selection in countries where family planning is limited. You can think of China's one-child policy. Or there are low fertility rates, so couples want to increase their chances of having a boy. At birth, girls tend to be neglected in terms of the amount of food or medical attention that they receive, which leads to higher death rates for girls under 5. And this is what we consider to be postnatal sex selection. Understanding gender-based sex selection requires a consideration of context. For example, poor economic conditions lead to the desire for smaller families, and patriarchal societies assign higher value to sons for ritual or economic reasons. Hundreds of years ago, dowries were property of the bride and provided her economic protection within the marriage because women could not inherit land. In more recent times, however, dowry policies have negatively impacted women by decreasing the desire for daughters and contributing to the murder of wives to collect or keep high dowry payments. When people are thought of as objects, commodities, or property, they are diminished and dehumanized and do not have the power to make their own life choices. In many ways and in many places, girls and women are treated as objects to be ogled, traded, sold, and controlled. Sexual objectification is defined as the reduction of women to bodies existing for men's pleasure, and this is very evident in media and also experienced by women around the world as street harassment. Sexually objectifying environments are most likely where there is a male-favored power differential, and when cultures prime men to view women as sexual objects. In some cases, this can actually result in extreme restrictions of women's dress and appearance. This also takes the form of sexual exploitation, which is the sexual abuse for another's gratification or financial gain, and we see this most commonly in prostitution and pornography. Byrne talks about some work by Barry from 1995 that points out that sexual exploitation objectifies women by reducing them to sex. This incites violence against women and reduces them to commodities for market exchange. Now, it's important to recognize that some women do choose sex work as a profession, but most women involved in prostitution are sexually exploited. In fact, one study shows that pimps control about 85 to 90% of prostitution. There are, of course, other forms of sexual exploitation that include sex trafficking, forced marriage, and child marriage. Violence is often gendered in that it is experienced disproportionately by women and girls because of their gender. The United Nations Declaration on the Elimination of Violence Against Women defines violence against women as any act of gender-based violence resulting in or likely to result in physical, sexual, or mental harm or suffering to women. One study by the World Health Organization actually found that over 35% of women worldwide have experienced physical and/or sexual violence by a partner or sexual violence by a non-partner. Violence against women and girls occurs in every segment of society, but it is influenced by intersectionality. Race, class, disability, sexual orientation, sexual identity, age, and religion all affect a woman's experience of gendered violence. Multiple intersection forms of discrimination mean that some groups of women and girls experience higher rates of violence than do other women in the same country, region, or community. For example, migrant and refugee women, indigenous women, and lesbian, bisexual, and transgender women all experience higher rates of violence. Violence against women is recognized as a violation of women's human rights and a form of gender discrimination. Violence against women prevents women from enjoying rights and freedoms equal to men and denies women fundamental freedoms. Studying violence against women shows us how women's social, political, and economic subordination are interrelated and influential in a variety of women's issues. Violence against women takes many forms, such as those we see in this diagram from your textbook. We've already seen some examples this semester, but in this module we'll look more closely at the issues of femicide in Mexico and sex trafficking and prostitution in Italy. My hope is that hearing from victims of these crimes and those advocates working for change will expand your understanding of these issues and why systematic change is necessary.